this. Let me share my screen really quickly, and we're going to jump in. I will say I'm going to fly through slides because what I really love doing is just actually demoing things. So we're going to fly through. Y'all know me, but a little bit of background in case you actually, first of all, agenda. We're going to go through a little bit of kind of how I got started in this journey. Some of you that came to the first webinar we did, I think like a month or two ago, we're going to fly through this, but this is just a little bit of context for those of you that are a little bit newer. And we're going to talk a little bit about and demo how we've applied this to content creation and demo a bunch of stuff. But we're going to fly through that because I really want to get to the third section, which is, okay, now how do we apply this to other jobs to be done across go-to-market and empower your growth, right? So super quick about my background. I mentioned earlier with the Brazilian music going on, I'm originally from Brazil, live in the Bay Area, and a little bit of my background, I started my journey back at IBM and HP where I built these massive content programs. And so at one point we had over 1,000 contributors. We were doing over 2 million words a year. We had managing editors from Wired and a bunch of other publications. And, we're just cranking this content, and it was really, really hard. And it took a long time, and it's very, very complex. So I learned a lot throughout my journey. And then I was lucky enough to join HashiCorp, where eventually they went public. I was a part of Service Titan, Scale AI, where we did our first conference, Transform, with Sam Altman, and got to kind of see behind the scenes and learn a ton. And then Deepgram more recently. And so that's just a little bit about me, and I'll talk more how I got started in this journey. And like I said, I'm flying through because we got some awesome demos, and I want to make sure we have tons of time at the end for questions and just to jam out a little bit, right? But first of all, this is one of my favorite things to help us rethink where we're going with AI. There's so much noise out there with AI, but stop for a second. What happens if your CEO or your manager or whoever came to you tomorrow and said, hey, I went crazy. I decided to hire 100 people for you because you've been complaining you need more resources, and here you go. They start tomorrow. What are you going to do with them? Like, how do you even start to delegate things? How would you even decompose the work that has to be done? Would you be able to even get value out of that? And I feel like we're in this phase right now where as these models are getting more powerful, the ability to pull these things together without code even is getting more and more powerful. People don't even know what to do with it because it's so powerful, and they're not thinking it the same way, right? They're thinking of, let me write a job description and post it. So that's one way for us to start to rethink and reframe our thinking. The other one that I like to think about that is just going to set the stage for the rest of today is, okay, what happens if you had to delegate 100% of your job starting tomorrow? How would you do it? Like, if your life depended on you delegating 100% of your job starting tomorrow, like, how would you do it? And I think when you put those two things together, it starts to really make sense, right? Because I truly believe you will never be able to delegate to AI something that you're not even capable of delegate to another human, right? And the kind of thinking, the first principles thinking that's required is different here. But it's really exciting. And so I said this in the last webinar, right? Like, well, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is like, crap, all our jobs are going to be gone. Robots are going to take over, right? But I really think, at least where the technology is right now, the truth is, I don't think AI is going to take your job, but people like us, they're like going and people like you that are actually taking the time to retool yourselves and rethink and become native to this technology. Like, we're going to be so much more productive and so much more effective than anyone else in the market, right? And we're already starting to see this where we've hired amazing talent offshore, and within 6 months or so, they're more productive than some of my other employees, right? And that's amazing to kind of see this transformation. And that's like really what we're trying to do. Okay, so before we keep going, I hate when we go through like this massive presentation and do all this stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like, what was the takeaway? What are we doing here? So let's start with the takeaways, which is, if you get nothing out of today, this is kind of what I would recommend you think about. One is, at the end of the day, find ways to become native to this technology. Just get started, just do stuff, play with it, find ways to get value out of it. Two, start taking more of a first principles approach to your work, like write things down, understand how work is done, like think through the steps more. Third, I said this already, like delegation is a superpower nowadays. It's not just a thing that's like, oh, I'm a manager now, I got to delegate, right? No, every single person needs to be a world-class delegator from now on. That's just the bottom line, which also means, by the way, you should improve your writing skills, because if you can't write, then that's gonna be a little bit not good for you, right? And then finally is, how do you start to think about where can I plug in AI? And that's what we're gonna go through later this presentation. All right, fun journey. How do I start? So this all started about a year ago, actually over a year ago now, where working at Deepgram as CMO, and I was trying to find ways to increase our traffic, and I started running into a lot of these sites where there were kind of AI apps directories, right? But the content was horrible. And so at the same time, I started getting familiar with AirOps, and was playing around with a ton of different models as well. And I said, these sites, they're getting a ton of traffic, but the content and the experience is really, really horrible. I think if I do just a little bit better, then there's a huge opportunity to grow traffic, right? And so I went into this journey of like, I just want to build something, right? And so I did this on the side of like, how do I build this catalog of AI apps? It's just a challenge, right? Of like, how do I do this? So the first thing was just the validation. I said, hey, if I go and I set up these workflows, very basic prompts, right? And I feed it the right inputs. In this case, I was scraping the home pages of these apps, right? To understand what those apps do. Like, can I get a better version than what's in other sites, that are getting, a ton of traffic? And the answer was like overwhelmingly yes. And I was like, this is awesome. And that's when this light bulb moment happened, where it was like, oh man, this is so powerful. This is cool. This is fun. So then I was like, all right, let's just think through it. All right, I need this page. I want to build this catalog, this product hunt like catalog. What are all the components? What are all the things I need to do? Like, first, I need to do this, 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 and this. And then I just kind of listed them out, right? And I said, I'm just going to do the most basic version of this and just see if I can do it. And that's kind of when I started in the journey where, found the seed list. And I know for some of you that attended some of the workshops and the webinars, this is repetitive, so I'm going to fly through. Seed list, we built a command center. We had, workflows to generate the article taglines and a bunch of other things. And then programmatically creating cover images, finding logos using different API enrichments. And then finally, like the quality control, having a human in the loop that can guide the whole process along, right? And, you fast forward now and the results are kind of obscene, honestly, right? And again, these results are not only, although the majority of this is the AI apps, but we now have a glossary. We're using it to refresh all our blog content. We now rank for over 226,000 keywords, and it's really crazy. We have over I believe 240,000 subscribers in the newsletter, and a ton of backlinks, more than 3x the volume of people searching for Deepgram. So there's kind of this impact on the brand, and not only that, but also like all our revenue metrics, our usage metrics have hit like all-time highs pretty much every quarter since, right? And a lot of that usage, a lot of that kind of bottom-up usage is reflected also in sales deals, not just in the product-led stuff, right? And the really cool thing is, as I went through this journey and started doing these workshops, like the one next week, was like a lot of people, including some of the ones that you met earlier today, right? They started in this journey. So it wasn't kind of a one-off thing where, hey, this only worked for Deepgram, right? Now we're seeing it across the board. And so now I'm going to go through really quickly on the behind the scenes with the content approach. And then as we go through that, we'll start to talk about like, okay, what are the, hold on, I see, can you guys hear this phone going off?
Yeah. Somebody's calling you to tell you about the last slide.
I know. All right. That is on me. My bad. All right. Somebody's calling me on WhatsApp.
One thing that we might want to ask too, while there's this little pause, is how familiar people are with AI, like on a scale of 1 to 5. If you're using it, maybe it's like first time ever thinking about it is a 1, and then 5 is like you're training LLMs.
Yeah, and I'm gonna open the chat too, so that I can see what people are posting. All right, cool. A lot of 3s, 2s, awesome. So this is the approach I recommend for you to think about this, right? Regardless of where you are, if you're there's some fives here, great, right? Like, but it's think about like combination of strategy and execution, right? At the end of the day, like a lot of times the reason people are not doing this and applying this more is because they say, I don't have time, right? And so a lot of how we solve for that is hiring experts in the loop and people that can be the humans in the loop reviewing and QAing. And then doing this combination of AI workflows, just start somewhere, don't try to make it perfect. An expert in the loop that can get to that last mile. If you think about like Amazon and delivery, right? The last mile is always the hardest one. It's the same thing with anything you're doing that's going to use workflows. Like the last mile is the hardest. Don't try to automate the last mile right away. Like use humans, right? There's a lot of different ways that we're applying humans, sometimes offshore, and amazing smart people that can guide us through in a cost-effective way, and then try to apply automation and streamline the process, right? But I'm gonna go through and I'll just say like a lot of this stuff are things that is not just like what I did and what Deepgram did. Now I'm learning from a lot of the people that took our workshop, and a lot of the people that have taken they're like in this journey learning on their own or learning along with us, right? And it's been like so fun it's so gratifying as I get these comments from people just like, oh, this is awesome. This like 10x my learning. And that's kind of what we want. And that's why I don't hide anything. Everything we're doing is just like out in the open for people to just take it and use it and make it better, right? And so the first step is like gather context, right? And so that is, hey, describe your company, describe your products, describe like who you go after, your personas, right? Do competitive research. And so that's usually the first step we go through, and I'll walk you through these workflows. Then we're building and adapting the workflow, which we'll demo here in a second. And then the third part is, okay, build a place where you collaborate and where is your source of truth, where you manage like your command center, right? Your operating system, and then just get to publishing. And we've seen this example you're seeing with Homebase, which's been applying this approach, and we're just seeing like insane results. It's been really, really, really cool to see. I don't know if there's anyone from Homebase and that will post in the chat, but it's been really cool to see them rank like super high in just a few months, right? So this is another example, not Deepgram, right? We're seeing like these amazing early results. And so with that, we're going to go into the demo, but I just want to encourage everyone, every single one of these results that I'm showing here are people that either took the workshop or are working with GrowthX, or people that just are doing it on their own, and it works, right? And we'll go through and explain why we think it works. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second and set up for this demo over here. And as I go through, Demetrius, feel free to stop me too as people have questions, because this part is going to be the fun one.
For sure.
All right. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Cool. You guys see my screen? Sweet.
Yep.
All right. So first, just quick, let me zoom in a little bit for everyone. All right. So this is just an overview of an example of an Airtable that has like the command center, right? Like, so before we go into the workflows, this is usually like AirOps has an awesome grid platform, and we use it a ton. But then we also integrate it with Airtable to make sure like we have a single place where you have everything, like from all the keywords to the search volume, the keyword difficulty, all the assignments, like everything we're pumping out, right? And so, all right. So first, a lot of this one is about generating long tail variations, right? So you might have a idea for a keyword or an assignment or a writing assignment that you want to do, and you say, hey, this is working really well. I want to figure out what are all the different variations I can have. So this is a simple example, right, where you go through and you what it's going to do, it's going to think through like, okay, what are all the different variations, templates, and then you pick a template and it's going to generate like 20 or 30 of those, right? And the reason I'm like going through some of these examples and starting very simple is so that like as we go into the more kind of like I like to call it gnarly workflows, they might be a little bit overwhelming. But once you start to decompose them and start small, you'll start to get really used to it and start to understand how things work, right? Like, so here's an example where it probably saved us a ton of time in thinking through the possibilities, right? So it's just one of the things we do other than keyword research. Then we can go through and say, hey, now I'm actually going to run this one again. So you see, so let's say you pick a keyword, and let's say you work for Ramp or ZipRecruiter, right? Like we're just using them randomly here. And so you might want to try to figure out, hey, I'm not ready to start publishing AI content, but I think there's ways that this type of content this type of approach can help in my actual writing. And so in this workflow, what we do, and you see how powerful it is, right? We actually go through and do a search, and I'll show you the workflow, and to try to better understand what is the intent of someone searching for this based on what the company does. So in Ramp's case, like you can see here how it connects to Ramp, of financial planning, expense optimizations, and things like that. But if instead you work for, let's say, ZipRecruiter, right? This is already adapting to that and understanding that ZipRecruiter, you probably are looking for a job instead, right? But it can go through. I was joking with Jimmy the other day. It's like this is like having a PhD as a service, right? And where as you go through, it's really, really powerful. Where you are, in this case, we're using Perplexity API to get a description of the company, right? So in this case, let's say like Ramp, and it's describing the company, what are the core features of that company, and you can see how quickly it's doing that versus going and visiting a website, right? Then it's doing what are the top search results for that keyword, why does it rank, why do we think it ranks for, and this is the PhD as a service. I always like to, it's like a little prompt hack that I love to use. It's like, hey, you're a PhD in X. And now what we're doing is we're essentially priming this kind of like chain of thought, if you will, right? Like, hey, think about this. Okay, now think about why do you think this ranks? And now we can go into the next step, which is like, okay, now we're trying to rank for this keyword. Tell me about like the intent of this person, but give me details, tell me about their emotional and psychological state, right? And so anyways, you can see why this is so powerful. Can you go in ChatGPT and try to replicate this? Absolutely, right? Like, but and I think like AirOps is a great platform, but it's not just about the tool. It's about the understanding, like the behind the scenes of what makes a great content is understanding what people want in that content and why they're searching for something, right? And then we start to apply that to these much like bigger workflows here. So this one is a article refresh one. Sorry, go ahead.
Marcel, just one sec, because I think there's someone asking in the chat if you can take a step back and talk about what the goal of that last workflow that you did was. Did you build it for keyword ranking, for increased growth, for home base? Like what was the point of that?
Yeah, so this one is the intent and outline one is at the end of this, you have a outline that will guide a writer. So you're not ready to have something more AI assisted. You want to help your actual writers, which can be an employee or it can be someone you hire as a writer, to understand one, this is what we're trying to rank for. This is the topic we're trying to rank for. Why do people care about this topic? And all the writing will be anchored on that ideally. And then also an outline. And so it should facilitate the process and managing like literally thousands of writers. Often when you don't give them an outline or an idea of what you were expecting from them, then they can write whatever, right? And might not be the right thing to write. So I'll fly through this because I really want to get to the next section as well. And I know I'm going super fast here and it can be a little overwhelming, but what I'm hoping you all will get out of these workflows and kind of what I'm showing here is that one, like it's really powerful. Two, get started somewhere, and we'll share a little bit later, different resources to get started. But this is not meant to be, hey, teach me step by step. That's why we do like an entire whole day workshop. Like we have one next week. We have recordings of others we can share, but in this one, this is a use case that's really common where, hey, I have this content used to rank well, or this content was good, but it's out of date. Can you help me refresh this, right? And so this one we created, you can see the input is a page from ZipRecruiter. This is the keyword we want to rank for. And you can actually see the full output, including adding back some of the images from the original article. There's tables, everything here, right? Cool. All right. So I'm gonna run through a couple of other ones. So this is the refresh one where you can see there's iteration steps. There is a lot of different LLM steps. But the bottom line is now this enables us by the way, a lot of these templates, AirOps has a ton of them already out of the box. So check them out as well. And that's a great way to learn is like take a template that's a little bit more robust and you can start playing with it, trying different inputs, seeing the outputs, and start becoming more familiar. Yeah, and we'll share the link to the workshop as well in the chat and the follow-up. Cool. Okay, so now what we started to do was then take a lot of these concepts that I showed you and build an entire flow, including human review steps, to go from the keywords that we want to rank for all the way to writing an entire article. And that's what you saw in the Airtable that I showed, right? Where we can start with something like, hey, Homebase, they're creating content around for small businesses in the US, right? So it's like, hey, how do you start a business from scratch? And but then we also want to make sure we're linking to our own content, we're mentioning what we do as a company, and you can see even in the writing, like it feels and it reads a lot more human. And a lot of this is not only the approach of figuring out what are the right inputs, but what are the right ways to adapt this to your company, to your voice, to your brand, right? And so I'll give an example of one that we do that's really interesting, which is we take a sitemap, and so this is something you can apply right away. And AirOps has this thing where you can just give it a sitemap, and it will take every single page in your sitemap. But then we take that as we're writing a piece of content, and we ask an LLM to think through like which ones are the ones we should pull it into this article, and why is it relevant to this article we're writing, for example, and what are the different ways I should link to it in this article, right? So those are different examples of like how like this is saving so much time. Like when you have 5,000 pages, how could you possibly know what are the top 10 pages that are the most appropriate to link to from a piece of content? But then how can you do that times 100 or 1,000 over a month, right? Cool. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and get back to the slides really quickly. But Demetrius, any questions? I'm sure there's going to be
I think a big one that was coming through was what the relationship between AirOps and Airtable is.
Yeah, good question. So AirOps has an awesome grid that I showed you, and that helps quite a bit in kind of facilitating, kind of adding columns, adding workflows as columns, and getting the outputs. But if you are trying to collaborate with multiple people that want to comment on a record, or you're doing like very complex formulas, or you're trying to integrate with a lot of different tools, right? And pull a lot of this data from multiple places, that's where we tend to use Airtable and integrate with AirOps, right? Like, and so like you can hit, like we usually do a little flag, and we show this in the workshop too, like, and that triggers a workflow in AirOps, right? And we do that usually through Zapier or Make, and it's like a pretty straightforward process to do that. You essentially like AirOps has a native integration with Zapier that makes it super easy. Cool. All right, let's jump back in. All right, cool. All right, now the fun part. How do we start to think through and applying this to the rest of go-to-market, right? And as we're working with different companies and talking to different people that, that are thinking about growth and thinking about all the different jobs to be done in go-to-market, the question we get the most often is, okay, but where do I even get started, right? Like as we were going through just the demos, I'm sure you're thinking, okay, this might be a little overwhelming. Where do I get started? And my biggest recommendation here is don't try to go from 0 to 100, right? And don't try to even approach it from a perspective of, I have to get value out of this, or I have to automate this thing in the next week or two. Otherwise, it's not worth it, right? Or I have to show quote unquote ROI. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Like come at it from the perspective of, I need to retool myself and I need to become native to this technology, and I need to understand how this thing works, and I need to just be able to like play with it and understand the limitations, understand the components, and then start to think through my work and decompose my work, right? And then find opportunities where it's like, oh, I get it. This can be applied here, right? And so it can be like very simple things. For example, what are time-consuming tasks in your current workflow? I was talking to a demand gen leader at a fast-growing startup, late-stage startup, and we sat down and I was showing him some of the workflows and said, hey, one of the things we do is we spend a lot of money in paid search, and we have to review all these queries to find queries that are not relevant that we're bidding on so that we can add them to a suppression list, for example, right? So we built a workflow in like 10 minutes, and it gave a score of 0 to 100 whether a query was relevant to that business or not. And it's like, this right here is probably going to save the team 5 to 10 hours every single week from now on. But then that means we're not bidding on keywords that are not relevant to our business. So that was just like a small example of like, when we started the conversation, he wasn't thinking about it. But as we started to build workflows, he's like, oh, you know what? There's this thing we do every day. There's this thing we do every week, that's repetitive. Or maybe even if it requires human creativity, right? Like there's a lot of like things that LLMs are really good at. Then what are the bottlenecks? Like what if you had to 100x or 10x growth for your company? What are the biggest bottlenecks from a resource perspective or from a time perspective? Another one that people don't leverage enough is the fact that your company might have a ton of really unique data, right? Like something as simple as people visiting your site, what are they doing on your site? And one of the demos we're going to show you here in a second is like, how do you take that signal and combine it with other pieces of data like their website, scraping their LinkedIn, and then a description of your company, and do a personalized touch at scale, right? So we'll send these slides over, and these questions from my experience just help people think through a lot of it, right? And then as we were going through these workflows, I started really thinking about it because some of the ones I showed you, they're like version 7, right, of a workflow. And so the reason for that is we're constantly evolving, trying to play around with the components. But as I was doing that, I was like, what is the purpose that each step in a workflow serves? Like, why is there this component here, right? And then I just started like writing down some words that some of them are used often like inputs, right? Like, but then others I was just like, okay, like let me just give it a name, like, and let's just think through. So this helps me take something that can be really complex, like a system architecture looking thing, right? And saying, okay, let's just put AI aside, let's put the workflows aside. Like what is the function that we're trying to do in each of these steps, right? And so one is like thinking about what are the unique inputs you might have, right? We were talking to a business that's a very large social network that's taking this approach, and they have all this community that posts a lot of stuff. So they have all this very unique data that only they have access to of people talking and posting in these groups, right? And I was like, that's very unique input that we can use. But then often like inputs are very noisy, right? It can be like if you scrape a page, you're either getting Markdown or HTML, and it's just like, right? Well, that's a lot of noise. What are ways that you can extract more signal out of that noise? And that will make the rest of this flow and the rest of your output and outcome better. And then we started thinking through, okay, what are the variables? What are the things that we're constantly writing in different steps that we keep coming back to and having to rewrite? And so, for example, company description, right? Products, voice and tone, like formats. All these things are fairly standard. So if you create global variables or local variables, then you can put them everywhere, and then you can just modify it globally, right? So that will save you a ton of times. But just think through like, what are the constants that you want to hold constant in your overall inputs and flows, and that you can later on tweak in one place and see the results from like applying it everywhere,
Marcel, real quick, can you go back to that last slide? And maybe we can just ask people in the chat to throw in the chat like what some of your most time-consuming tasks are every day, and that can help inspire others to recognize, because I get the feeling we're all kind of in the same boat. And so when you hear others putting what they do, then it can help you realize, oh, maybe I could figure out a way. Somebody just put playing Wordle.
I love that. All
Shout
right,
out to Joel.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Childcare.
So
All right, that's a
yeah.
good one. Yeah, I have a 15-month-old daughter, so yes. Editing content,
Excellent.
I like it. Prioritizing
F-
tasks.
Finding
Great for
images from
success.
stock sites too. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's a great one. So yeah, we can just let that run, but I thought that
Cool.
would be good to get
Love
the
it.
creative juices going.
I love it. And people can kind of like riff off of each other on some of these ideas. Cool. Okay, so that was the variables I talked about, and now the planners. So this is something we learned through, unfortunately, trial and error, a lot of wasted time, which was if you go and you notice this, like try going to ChatGPT or Claude and try saying like, write me an article. And it's like, kind of garbage, right? And you can kind of say, hey, like, give me like an outline of an article. And it's okay, right? And then often if you say, hey, here's a bunch of context, here's some information, think through some of this information, right? Now that you have all this context, like, what do you think are the most important sections or points to cover if you were to write something like this, right? And often like that result will be way better, right? And so the reason for this is because it's kind of like if you're just winging versus if you prepare for something, it's the same thing. A lot of the human concepts apply here, right? It will do a lot better. So a lot of the time we've spent is to try to figure out the planners for these more complex tasks, right? So the outline generation is all about the planner. And then later on, the doers, right, that have all this context as well are going to go, hey, here's all this context. Now go follow this plan over here, which is the outline. And then go tackle the first one. And then you go and you say, okay, now that you've done the first one, like use this as context, and now go tackle the second one, but don't repeat anything you did in the first one, and so on and so forth, right? And that's something that is like saves you just an obscene amount of time, because that's the time consuming stuff. Even if you're using ChatGPT or Claude and you're copying and pasting things over, that's going to be the time consuming part, where building these more programmatic approaches to it will save you just an obscene amount of time, right? But then this is something that has been taking outputs from good to, whoa, this is really good, right? Which is the critics. And across like the almost any step in this entire flow or anything you're building, try to see if you can add a critic. And a critic is, hey, given this context, the same context I had before, right? You just gave me this answer. Now look at your own answer and tell me like what could be better about this answer, right? And then you go, okay, now go do that. Now go apply that, right? And at times you might even want a critic that doesn't have the context, because it might have like an outsider's perspective, right? So you give it a different context and you say, hey, look at this output. Like, how would you judge this output given this goal, right? And then finally, like the adapters. And so this is something I swear this is the most painful, time-consuming thing in my life. Like it was like you get to a point, right, where you're building these things and you're so excited and it's like, oh, this is good. And then you run into something where you're testing and you go, oh, it's not doing this thing well. It's not cross-linking well. Oh, it's not doing the headlines the way I want to do the headlines. Oh, it's not breaking down the paragraphs in varying between short sentences and long sentences. It's not, right? Like you run into something and then you go through this journey of like, let me go modify a bunch of stuff and see if I can get it that way. And then it messes up something else. And you're just like, oh my God, right? And so what I learned in that process is like, don't try to have a flow that in the doers that try to get everything right. When it comes to like formatting, when it comes to like, just get the substance right. And then you can create adaptation flows that takes something and reformats, or does the cross-linking, or does the fact-checking, or adds statistics to it, or whatever, right? Like, and that becomes a lot easier than you try to do it all at once and have these massive prompts, right? Because these LLMs will get stuck somewhere in the prompt and will anchor in that. And then no matter what you do, it won't change the output. And then the last thing is kind of what I like to call the post processors, which is things like, hey, like, okay, now here's this article, go write a meta description, right? Or, hey, now here's this personalized email we wrote, can you write a headline for this, right? And that's just like an additional output from this entire flow. Cool. Anything else that's come up in the chat before I keep going?
Just people wondering where they can play with your templates that you have that you've been showing.
Yeah. So two things. We're gonna share here in a couple of slides a link to the workshop next week, and I'll talk about it a little bit. And then as part of that, like there's a bunch of templates that we share for everyone, and there's a Slack community and everything. But two, AirOps was super gracious to also give us a special link and code that I'll share that you get a full month of like a ton of free credits as well. In addition to the fact that like their starter plan gives you 10,000 credits and it's like not very expensive at all. And they have a ton of templates there as well. So those are the kind of the two things that we'll share here in a second.
And Marcel, and so I know there's some people that were asking about the prompts when you were showing the workflows, and this is cool. But also, can you show, because somebody's asking, Rack's asking about adding supportive images to the blog posts, and I know you have done some cool stuff around that. So can you make sure to touch on that part?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let me touch on prompts because I think this is really core to everything you're gonna do. And look, there's like so many prompt courses out there, YouTube videos and whatnot. And from my experience, this is the challenge I found with a lot of this stuff is prompt engineers often don't know what great looks like at the end. And I don't mean this to be like, like offensive or anything to prompt engineers, because like they're one of the most valuable skills out there. But the problem is, if you're a prompt engineer, there's a chance you're not a expert in a certain topic, like, let's say in a home-based cases like SMB, right? And so you might not know what amazing writing looks like. So you might be writing really good prompts and you might know all these little hacks, but like the art and science here is like testing, looking at the output and knowing what great looks like. And if you don't know what great looks like, then you're only going to be as good as like, oh yeah, I guess this is good enough, right? Like if I'm writing a thing that's like highly technical and I don't know if the code that is spit out is correct or not, like there's only so much value I can add in the prompts, right? But so this is a little bit of a hybrid. By the way, there's a bunch of prompt frameworks out there that you can use, okay? So you don't always need to use like every single one of these things here. But what I found is sometimes even like you need some version of this if you want to get really consistent and good outcomes, okay? So, and by the way, you can also create flows or use ChatGPT to write better copy or better descriptions of each one of these things as well. So you can take a poorly written version and have flows or use ChatGPT or Claude to then go and improve this. For example, right? One of the things I did the other day, role. I was like, hey, you have a PhD in psychology, right? And you have a background in SEO. Cool, that's good, right? You gave us some context as a role. And by the way, roles, they're best in system prompts, and I'll go through it here in a second. But then you can go, I went into ChatGPT and I said, hey, describe someone that has a PhD in psychology and has written several books and give me like a description of their career journey. And it was like, and make sure they've worked for, and I named a few like consultant shops. They're like Bain and Accenture or whatever, right? And it literally wrote me a description of this person that like has 20 or 30 years of experience working for all these different companies and all these different things, right? So you can see how you can take this is where the human creativity comes in, right? Like, what are the different ways? Like, if you were describing this unicorn of a person, how would you describe it? And how could you describe it in more than one sentence, right? But then sometimes that doesn't actually help, right? And this is where the trial and error and knowing what great looks like is all about, right? Start small and then play with some of these components, right? Context, like, what is the situational thing that's happening right now? Like, right? Like, give it a little bit more context on what's happening. Okay, you have a PhD in psychology. Sweet. So what, right? You have a PhD in psychology and you work for this company and this company does X, Y, and Z, right? And your job is to do boom. Okay, this is the task, right? And you're doing the task for these people over here. And here's a little description of these people. This is remember the first one that I showed you on the intent? Here's what these people care about. Here's their emotional state. Here's their, right? And now you start to see how like all of these things can kind of come in. And then when you combine all of them, it's really powerful because it's just really detailed, but in a very like, a very specific way, right? Then you have style and tone, right? Like, and this is where you really need to like anchor things. Examples, honestly, do much better than describing just style and tone. You can say, hey, be funny, and you're gonna get some random cringe stuff, like some of my dad jokes, right? But but if you say, hey, here's a style and tone, and by the way, here's an example of that. Like, what have you learned from this example? Okay, cool. Now here's another example of that. Awesome. Okay, now take that and use this style and tone in this, right? And like it does a lot better when you can have examples in addition to guidelines. You know, same thing with format, right? Formatting, if you can have examples of the format as separately from the style and the tone, it will also do better. And then finally, constraints. Constraints are very tricky. Do not like mention a competitor. Do not write a conclusion. Do not write a sentence that says, okay, here's the blah, 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 right? You're like, no, just give me the output. Like these are all constraints that you want to put because you're trying to get something that you don't need to do additional formatting to, right? Or additional filtering through. And so like the tricky thing with constraints is like, it's a little bit of a trial and error. Sometimes you need to spread them out into multiple prompts or multiple places where you have these constraints. Sometimes you need to reinforce it. And then other times it just needs to be a post-processing flow that filters that out, right? I know I spend a ton of time here, but I promise you, like, hopefully some of you are getting value out of this because this is like thousands of hours of trial and error that I wish somebody would just told me. And then I can show you some of this stuff next, you know, but and some of these use cases we're going to go through. But Demetrius, keep me honest here and make sure like people are not lost or if there's questions or anything.
I think we're good. It's just we have
Cool.
13 minutes left. So,
Sweet. All right. We're going to go through some of these use cases, but before we do, I just want to give everyone this link and we can post, Demetrius, do you mind posting the link as well? And then the code here. We do this workshop. I don't want to oversell this thing, honestly. Like we charge for it because we found that if you don't charge for it, people don't show up, they don't give a shit, and they don't engage in the community, right? And we want everyone in the community, like Raymond is there. Like there's a bunch of people here today that they're like took one of the workshops and they can attest to it. And it's just because it's just time consuming and it's building together, right? But you can also go into that like journey by yourself, which is okay. Like a lot of people have done just like I have, right? But I just wanted to build a community of people like us that are like thinking this way that can help like that can help each other out. Raymond, I love it, man. You're hilarious. All right, let's do this. Let me reshare my screen. Okay, so make sure I'm sharing the right screen. All right, can you guys see my screen? Okay.
yeah.
Cool. All right, so let's talk about some of the different ways or different use cases of things we can build, right? And these are legit workflows that we build for Deepgram. Some of these are tests, some of them are actually live in production, right? So and they're pretty cool. So this one's a personalized first touch email. And I think in the first webinar we talked about Koala. They're one of my favorite tools. And so this one, like Tito is one of the founders, right? The input is like a LinkedIn profile, their company, right? And their email and their full name. And the output is a cringeworthy, but good cringe. You know, like there's, you know, when you have cringe and then there's like good cringe, this is like good cringe. My favorite part about this one is the AI generated. Okay, here's an AI generated sales joke for you. Why did the AI sales bot close so many deals? It had a deep learning curve. All right. But for those of you that don't know Deepgram does speech to text and text to speech APIs, right? Like Koala is a platform that helps like take your signals on your website and turn that into opportunities, right? And so like you can see it mentioned things about Tito's background. It mentioned things about what Koala does, right? And then it connected those things in a very unique way. For example, as a fellow product and engineering leader, loved your work as Segment and Dropbox, by the way. I thought this could be right up your alley. Now, is this perfect? By no means. So that you got to tweak, you got to give it more examples, right? And you're only giving it like a couple of inputs here, right? And then let's go through the workflow here just to see how simple this is, okay? Like fetch LinkedIn data, and then a very simple step that just says, hey, you're an expert in analyzing the profiles. This is a input processor, right? Like the input was the LinkedIn scrape data. This is the input processor, right? This is, you can see me anchoring on an example of format, and then that's it, and now it's giving me a better profile versus me just shoving the scrape, right? And then we do the same thing on scraping their website. And then from scraping their website, we can say, hey, you're an expert in analyzing web content. Tell me more about this company or whatever. Since then, we've used like Perplexity a lot for this type of thing, but this is even an outdated workflow here. We since use different ones, and then it generates that email, right? Cool. Let me fly through so we have a ton of time for questions. And this is just to give you all ideas of like things that people are doing. This one is a start, stop, continue. And the input is a transcript from a team meeting, and the output is just a summary, action items, and a start, stop, continue kind of retrospective, so very, very simple things, right? Like where you're taking, a call, a transcript, and you're creating these ways to process. And there's tons of tools out there, by the way, right? Like, so if you find tools that do like just that really well, great. What I found is that a lot of these tools like won't let you adapt it to what you want, This one is a lot of fun. This one is where we're taking a reference guide and we're turning it into more of a documentation page, and you can see here, this is saving a lot of time for dev advocates and things like that in our team, where they need to make some kind of technical material and turn it into a slightly different format of technical material that explains things a little bit better. By the way, if any of these you guys want me to dig in a little bit further, please let me know. And hopefully I don't accidentally share anything that I'm not supposed to. Okay, so this one is taking a call from customer success and generating, let me show you some of the outputs, a bunch of different outputs that go into Salesforce, right? Like, hey, account transition check, or it goes through a bunch of different checks. And let me show you the HTML here. It might be a little bit hard to read, but it's like overview. The account is currently in a positive state, blah, blah, blah. Customer overview, general help. This account is in blah, 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 blah. Key performance indicator, personnel changes, recent interactions, summary, key meetings, current projects they have, milestones, feedback and concerns we've heard from different interactions. What are some of the challenges in this account? What are the opportunities in this account? What are the next steps and actions? And then who are all the different contacts in this account, both on our side and their side, and then just some other notes and feedback. And you can see like super custom to like what we're trying to get out, right? And this is based on like multiple different inputs. But now like CS can save some time where, we didn't have enough resources to handle all the new accounts, and this is saving a ton of time, right? Then you do it once, and this is like taking calls and automatically pushing that into Salesforce or any other system. I love this one as well. Onboarding health, like essentially if onboarding doesning go well, usually account churns in the future, right? And you can see here, there's a couple of like API integration steps, but onboarding is progressing smoothly with Masterclass, actively using the product as intended. The deal closing 32 days ago and has already transitioned to production ahead of the projected launch date. This usage significantly ramped up. Like, this is awesome, right? Like, it's telling what model they're using from our side. And this is exactly the information you need, right? And you don't need to go ask somebody about it, and I'm going to stop here actually, because I think there's like so many others that we can go through, but tell me if there's a specific one, Demetrius, in the chat or anywhere else that folks are interested in. I'm happy to go through But this hopefully gave everyone a flavor of what's possible, and that's the intent, is to hopefully motivate you to get started, you know.